We never expected what happened with Helene. Our church was having a normal program year in late September when it just rained and rained and rained.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the Green Mountain community, we're right on the North Toe River in Yancey County. And so that particular community, which consisted of our church building, the post office, a store, and the home of the matriarch of the town, experienced not only the massive amounts of rain that we had prior to Hurricane Helene, but once all of that excess water and debris washed down the river and piled against our bridge there, once the bridge collapsed, and it did collapse, that huge amount of storm surge completely flooded the entire community.
Marshall is in Madison County, and the church is actually situated on the banks of the French Broad River. The building they have now was built in 1950, and when Hurricane Helene came through, it deposited, the river rose 27 feet above expected levels and deposited inches and inches of mud and river slush and debris in the church. And the second level is where the sanctuary is. And the river rose high enough that it rose even 3 feet into the sanctuary.
Helene hit our church hard. We are 2 stories. Our basement has been flooded before, pretty severely a few times, but this time the flood got into the upstairs. It was over twice as much water as we have ever seen before, and our church was devastated.
The Marshall Presbyterian congregation got to work as quickly as they could, clearing the debris out of the church, and we're happy to work with a lot of volunteers from Marshall, members of organizations that use the Marshall Church for board meetings and other meetings and gatherings of their own, joined in to help get the mud out of the church and the debris out of the church.
At our church, a 2-story building, we have our sanctuary on the 2nd floor, the basement floor, our restrooms, assembly hall, fellowship hall, and classrooms was completely submerged in the water. We had a wall of about 6 feet of mud, and everything downstairs was lost. Our parking lot, which was between the church, the road, and the river, completely washed away, is gone. And so now where there was a parking lot, there's now a sheer cliff into the banks of the North Toe River.
In our area, communication was just cut off. We couldn't get out from our home until Sunday. That was on a Friday. We couldn't get out and get away from our home until Sunday. We had no communication with anybody, and so we didn't know what had happened to the church. We didn't know what had happened to our members.
When our family could get out of our neighborhood, we went down to the church, which is downtown, and found that the church had internet and power, which felt like a miracle. We opened the doors right away, and people just started streaming in because it was one of the few places that had the ability to contact the outside world without internet or television service or cell phone coverage. So many people didn't know what was going on in our community and had no way to let their loved ones know they were okay. So for about 2 weeks, our church was just a hub of people charging their cell phones and doing work and being in touch with family and friends.
Yeah, so like everyone else, we were completely in the dark with no way to communicate with each other in the immediate aftermath of the storm. But once we started being able to regain cell phone service, the capacity to communicate, folks began checking in with each other, offering prayers, offering support. In the immediate future, since we couldn't gather for worship at Green Mountain, the other church that I pastor in Mitchell County, Beulah Presbyterian, they were kind enough to, with arms wide open, invite the Green Mountain congregation to worship there. So from those small groups of folks checking in on each other, that eventually translated into being able to gather again with the folks at Beulah for a joint worship service.
We are not able to worship in the building, obviously, but we have been able to secure a worship space at the Marshall High School in one of their newer buildings there. The Marshall congregation has a special relationship with the Walnut Presbyterian Church congregation and worships with them at least once a month. So the Walnut Church has wrapped its arms, as you might imagine, around the Marshall Church, and they're doing a variety of programs together.
If you've ever been to Michaelville, it is 2 or 3 buildings. All of them are damaged heavily. The post office, the small post office, has completely disappeared. It's gone. The building beside us is a gallery and a store, an art gallery and a store. It is terribly damaged.
We were fortunate, if you want to call it that, to have a couple of our church members appear on national news. We were on CBS News' 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago. Jane Whitson Peterson, her mother, Parazadie Whitson, who's 96 years old, and interestingly enough, one of the 2 oldest ladies in our congregation. She's the matriarch of Green Mountain. Her home and her family's store adjoined the church and lost everything, just like we did with our church. So that encapsulates the devastation that particular family encountered, but as well as other folks in our congregation. We lost bridges, we lost driveways, some vehicles. So Green Mountain and that immediate community and the folks who lived there who attended our church were particularly devastated by everything that happened.
We are concerned because we are in a floodplain, and how we rebuild and what regulations will be on us as we rebuild is a concern.
Everybody's tired, there's no question about that, but the Marshall congregation, though it's small, is a mighty, can-do, Appalachian kind of people, and they enjoy being together and find renewal and rest for themselves when they are able to be together for worship.
A couple of things we do know. We know that the city of Asheville will be different for the next few years. 2 major commercial districts were lost, the River Arts District and the Biltmore Village District. It will take months and years for those to come back with the kind of vibrancy that they had before. We know that the economic shape of Asheville will be different, and we already see that, and that's going to change in the coming years. We also know that our congregation is committed to being part of this city. The previous high flood was in 1916, and there is records in our minutes in our church history of how the church responded to that flood in that decade. So now 108 years later, our congregation is saying, well, this is the flood that we're responding to, and we're committed to our city and to our neighbors and to doing everything we can to help rebuild our community.
You've just heard from several pastors who have experienced damage to the congregations they serve. We know the damage is much wider across Western North Carolina. We are grateful at the Presbytery of Western North Carolina for the overwhelming support from congregations and individuals who have wanted to bring supplies and who are ready to come when the time is right.
After the initial shock and exhaustion of the cleanup, the churches across the presbytery have banded together and have been finding creative ways to worship and be the people of God in the community. They ask for prayers, for patience, and continued strength as they approach decisions regarding rebuilding and moving forward.
What we really need now, in addition to your prayers, is funding. The Presbytery has a disaster relief fund that will help our communities and congregations support local needs as they emerge and into the future. They're helping with things like rental assistance, housing needs, and rebuilding in local communities. Your gifts can make a real difference. So we ask you to give generously, and we thank you for helping us be the hands and feet of Jesus.